Trenton, what are you thinking about?
I just have Georgia on my mind.
Isn't that a song?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, well, okay then. Why do you have Georgia on your mind?
Well, have you heard anything about the new Georgia voting law?
A little bit. I know the MLB All-Star game was moved out of Georgia from Atlanta to Denver because of it.
Yeah, that's true. The MLB is protesting the new law by moving the game, but there's a lot more to it than that.
How much more?
A lot. But don't worry, our friend Giovanna knows all about it. Let's now head to Giovanna for this week's edition of NexGen Politics.
Hey NexGen viewers, Giovanna here for an important edition of NexGen Politics. Trenton, I too have had Georgia on my mind for a while now. It all started back in November 2020 during the presidential election. It was a close race in Georgia, but after counting all the ballots and then counting them again and again due to accusations of election fraud, Democrat Joe Biden carried the state. It was the first time a Democrat had won Georgia and turned the state blue since 1992. Then, in the Senate runoff elections in January 2021, Democrats Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock beat Republican opponents David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, another sign that Georgia is turning blue and more Democratic. But Georgia is not all blue, and its state government is what we call a trifecta. A trifecta occurs when the same political party holds control of the governor's office and both chambers of the state's legislature. Currently in Georgia, the Republicans have a state government trifecta. Republicans control both chambers of the state legislature, and the governor of Georgia is also a Republican. So although Georgia voted Democratic in 2 national elections, the state government is still controlled by Republicans, and the Republican officials in Georgia have been very busy. Following the presidential election and accusations of election fraud, Republicans have been working on legislation which they say will increase voter security in future elections. Law SB 202 was approved by Georgia's Republican-controlled state legislature and signed by Governor Kemp on March 25, 2021. But what does this new voting law say exactly? There's a lot packed in the law, but here are some of the key points. SB 202 states the following. First, there are new stricter ID requirements for absentee ballots, and it's now illegal for election officials to mail out absentee ballot applications to all voters, and voters have less time to request an absentee ballot. Next, there will be less ballot drop-off boxes, limiting the number to 1 box per every 100,000 people, and these drop boxes will not be available 24/7, but instead will be open during normal business hours only. Additionally, mobile voting centers or buses that brought voting to the voter if they did not live near a polling location are essentially banned. And last, it is now illegal to offer food or water to voters standing in line at a polling location. People in favor of the law say the goal is to improve election security, and while making someone show an ID to get a ballot does show heightened voter security, banning people from providing food and water to voters that are waiting in lines does not, especially since Georgia is notorious for long voting lines. In the November 2020 election, in more populated areas such as Atlanta, people reported waiting in line for more than 10 hours. And now it's a misdemeanor to bring these people refreshments while they wait?
What? How can it be illegal to bring people snacks and water?
That's just being neighborly and shouldn't get you arrested.
I totally agree with you. Many critics of the law say this is not about voter security at all, but instead about voter suppression. Voter suppression is a strategy used to influence the outcome of an election by discouraging or preventing certain groups of people from voting. Voter suppression is not new and unfortunately not uncommon. If we go all the way back to 1776, when the Founding Fathers first wrote about a fair and just democracy for all, only white men were allowed to vote. In 1870, after the Civil War, the 15th Amendment granted African American men the right to vote, but Jim Crow laws required literacy tests, proof of property ownership, and poll taxes to vote. This eliminated nearly all African Americans from being able to vote until the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which outlawed voter suppression and discrimination tactics, and gave black men and women the legal right to vote. Many people thought this marked the end of voter suppression. However, it still exists in society today. In Georgia, some people believe the Republicans behind the new voting law are trying to suppress voters that are more likely to be Democrats or vote for a Democratic candidate. For instance, in the 2020 presidential election in Georgia, of the absentee or mail-in ballots received, 65% of them voted for Democrat Joe Biden, while only 34% of them voted for Republican Donald Trump. By imposing much stricter limits on absentee and mail-in ballots, some people believe this is a purposeful tactic to limit Democrats from voting at all. Additionally, imposing ID requirements will most likely affect voters of color. And according to the Pew Research Center, the number of Black registered voters in Georgia increased by 25% in 2020, more than any other racial group. The new ID requirements could prevent some of these voters from being eligible. And finally, limiting the number of drop-off boxes and times people can drop off their absentee ballots makes it more difficult for working people to vote. Put simply, although some parts of Georgia's new voting laws make voting more secure, all parts of the new law make it more difficult for people to vote. Backlash over the new Georgia law has come from many public figures. In addition to the MLB moving the All-Star game from Atlanta, Georgia to Denver, Colorado, actor Will Smith and director Antoine Fuqua have pulled the production of their upcoming $100 million movie Emancipation out of Georgia, giving the following statement. We cannot, in good conscience, provide economic support to a government that enacts regressive voting laws that are designed to restrict voter access. They now plan to shoot the movie in Louisiana instead. Additionally, hundreds of companies across America have signed a letter opposing U.S. voting restrictions, and President Joe Biden has called the new Georgia law an atrocity and said this is Jim Crow in the 21st century. It must end. We have a moral and constitutional obligation to act. Despite these protests, other state governments are on a path to implement similar laws to Georgia's. States such as Texas and Arizona are considering voting bills as well. So what can be done to combat these laws? Well, lawsuits have already been filed challenging the laws on the basis that they disproportionately affect minority voters. But if the laws stand, it'll be up to voters to fight suppression and make sure their voices are heard. For the next major election in 2022, Georgians should be prepared to bring their own snacks and water in line, perhaps a folding chair too, and make a plan to vote early. For all of us who don't live in Georgia or who are under 18 and aren't eligible to vote yet, myself included, it's up to us to stay vigilant of these laws and speak out about how they affect our democracy. I'm Giovanna, and thank you for tuning in to this important edition of NexGen Politics.